Go back in time before electricity, running water, or any way to communicate with the outside world. Now, do it in 1920s Australia. Our guest today comes to us from that opposite side of the world. We're up early and she's up late, so we're going to have a lot of fun talking about her latest novel, Grasp the Nettle. Let's give a mighty CCW welcome to historian, octogenarian, and author Sylvia Lerch. Yay! Welcome to our show, Sylvia, and I wave to you from clear across the planet here. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. Usually the first thing we do for guests is to let them tell our audience where to find them on the internet, but you are not on the internet. So we will make sure that all of the links directly to your book and how they can find you will be on our website, counterculturewise.com. And if you do decide to hop onto TikTok, let us know and we'll make sure that everybody knows where to find you. Let's start right out of the gate and talk about the title of your book, Grasp the Nettle. Now, I grew up in Washington State where we have stinging nettles aplenty, and the title spoke to me because of that, but not everybody is familiar with those. So why don't you let us know why you titled the book that and why specifically nettles?
It's an old-fashioned term that fits with the era of the story, the 1920s. Nettles particularly grow where people have what we call chooks, that's domestic hens. They seem to grow very willingly around hen houses, but who these days has backyard hens? So the cover was designed to be instantly legible and to relate to the fact that it's an Australian story, so it's got gum leaves.
Yeah. I was going to ask about that. That's not actually a nettle, but it is definitely an Aussie plant.
Yes.
And why Grasp the Nettle, if I'm understanding it, is basically let's take charge of things. It's going to sting, but let's just do it. Is that kind of the overall meaning of that title?
It's be brave enough to face your circumstances and so forth. Be brave enough to just have the courage to make the best of your circumstances. Nice. And actually, if you do grasp the nettle, it doesn't sting you. It stings you if you rub up against it. And
lightly, yes, exactly.
Yes. So I thought it was appropriate because so much of the 1920s era is not well understood. It's remembered for its gay abandon and so forth, but it must actually have been a very difficult time of life for a lot of people for a number of reasons, like the failure to recognize gender diversity, for one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something I found very interesting in this book is you don't come out and just overtly say anything. And I found myself writing little sticky notes and question marks and highlighting things. I'm like, wait, is he, is she? and so I have so many questions, but we'll probably do that offline because I want readers to read this and enjoy how it unfolds. Mm-hmm. The book is written through journal entries of basically a pioneer woman who is married off to a guy in the, would you call that the outback?
It is a very remote district. I still live in that district.
Oh, really?
Yes. I live in a really small town, but the nearest town south of here is 300 kilometres, and the nearest one is 600 kilometres. And it is a remote area. And, of course, in that era, there were no phones, no internet. Right. None of the things we take for granted, no GPS, no electricity, and it would have been 10 times more remote than it is today. Yeah. Because those things hadn't been invented even.
Oh, she barely even had a stove or a roof. I mean, she started our heroine in the book, a dirt floor, kind of a put together stove that was really smoky, and literally had to do everything from scratch. How much of you is in that character?
A lot. I enjoy basic living, if you like. I lived on a yacht with no engine and no refrigeration, and you really learn to pare down your possessions when you live on a sailing boat. And I have had lots of first-hand experience of cooking on an open fire, on hunting trips and so forth. And Elsie, my protagonist, she doesn't have a stove. She has an open hearth with a chain hanging down there and S-hooks on the chain, so you can put what you're cooking close to the fire or further away from the fire. So there is some element of control in it. And she's too far out of town to walk into town. She has no horse to ride, no car, of course, and her husband works in a job that takes him away for weeks at a time. So she's left to her own devices. And she is educated enough to be keeping a journal. That means she was taught to read and write and so forth, which is a very prestigious thing really in those days, because so many people couldn't read or write. And so the only book she has to read is a King James Version copy of the Bible, and she reads it, but she makes unconventional interpretations of the text.
Actually, there are a couple of conclusions that she came to that rocked my world. And there's one in particular that I actually discussed with my husband last night, and I marked it and highlighted it because it's so profound and yet makes so much sense. I'm going to go ahead and read it if that's okay. So she is at the very beginning. She names her diary Poppy. And so writes to it, she says, "Dear Poppy," and she treats her diary as if she's writing letters to a person. And so you get a lot of insight because she's very, very honest and detailed, whereas her husband that she doesn't even meet until she gets sent out there to be with him, he just is not. He doesn't. I mean, you really have to glean and dial down to get anything from his journal entries. It's mostly just business stuff, but once in a blue moon, you'll get a little insight into
little tidbit drops.
Yeah. So I want to read this part here because, this really hit me. At the end of chapter 3 in Genesis, this is her writing to her diary. After Adam and Eve had been disobedient, it says God clothed them with skins. It must mean that additional punishment for Adam and Eve was for God to clothe them in skin and bone, flesh and blood, reduced to the status of mere animals, subject to gravity, disease, and decay, and no longer able to hover in the image of God. I love that interpretation. It's so fabulous.
It makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense, and certainly I'm very happy to be able to express that in a form that claims to be fiction. It makes sense to me that I can say that disguised as fiction. But earlier she's reading Genesis, and she reads in the early chapters of Genesis that God made the waters and the Holy Spirit hovers over the water like a dove. And she says, if I am made in the image of God, I must be able to hover. And then she reads on and works out, Adam and Eve must have been reduced to mere animals. What a punishment. And how sad to be no longer able to hover.
I think it's such a wonderful and poignant conclusion that she came to, because I've read the Bible many, many times, and that thought never occurred to me, but it makes so much sense. That actually makes a lot more sense. So I love that, like you said, through fiction, you were able to convey that. I think that's fantastic. And there's a lot more insights in there. You very, very lightly touch on the natives, the Aboriginals, and then very, very lightly touch on Islam. And you forget that there was a presence way back then of you even mentioned camels and things like that. And I think people have no idea. So you get a little bit of historical knowledge as well. We talked a little bit about the incredible loneliness that she must have felt. And toward the end, it's almost as if she starts going a little bit mad. I mean, she starts talking to the leather flap on her window that was made from a shoe tongue and gives it a name and everything. And then, of course, she doesn't even question or rail against the fact that she's just basically seen as a breeder, and that her entire reason to exist is to give him children. And then your book is so gentle, and yet it touches on such hard, difficult things, where he talks about if it's only a girl.
It's quite a balance.
If she has a baby and it's only a girl, like it's just a throwaway thing. It's just, I don't know how you would finesse it that way, where you're reading it and you're like, and yet at the same time, it's just, you just gently ease into it. I was really impressed. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be blowing smoke out of your tutu here, but I really did enjoy this book. So sometimes I get gushy. I do apologize.
She fangirls.
I do. I fangirl. That's what we call it. Why did you choose that specific time period? I mean, you talked a little bit about it being, gay and happy, and people think about the Roaring '20s in the U.S. Things were drastically different in Australia, and so you are basically that girl in modern day. What made you pinpoint that specific decade?
Well, that was brought alive to me by my parents' first-hand experience of it. My father was born in 1902 and my mother in 1906, so they experienced that era firsthand, and they lived through very difficult times, the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, and they just made history come alive. For instance, in that era, must have been 1920, my grandfather, my mother's father, bought the second automobile, you would say, a motor car, ever sold in Tasmania. And he'd worked and lived with horses all his life, so he didn't really know what he was buying. And my mother said he learnt to drive this thing. He would start it in first gear and move up to second gear and all the way up to third gear. But she said if the engine was labouring because they were going up a hill, and there are lots of hills in Tasmania, instead of changing down to second gear, he would let go the steering wheel and raise his arms high in the air and urge the horses on. Get up!
Oh my goodness. So he didn't quite understand downshifting. He was invoking the horses. That's hilarious.
It just makes it come alive. And they had lots of stories like that. And so the book really tries to encourage the reader to use their imagination too. It's short and intense, and it's controversially non-conformist, but it has other curiosities. The formatting is important. The two diaries in different
fonts.
What do you font?
Yeah,
yes.
fonts. Yeah.
To make it easier to read. But a lot of the historical information is accurate. The two protagonists are very different people. She's the energetic, young, romantic young woman, and he's the very staid businessman trying to please his father. And but information such as the fact that his brother, who never came home from the First World War, had taken with him to war the book that so many Australian soldiers took with them. That's C.J. Dennis's book, The Sentimental Bloke, which is full of bawdy, ribald ballads and songs written in the vernacular. And it includes that wonderful chorus that people say should have been turned into the Australian national anthem. I don't know if you know it, but I can recite it.
Please do. Please do.
It comes time and time again in this ballad, but it's get a bloody move on, have some flaming sense, learn the flipping art of self-to-bloody fence.
I love it.
And,
So much
and the
cleanse.
soldiers took that book to war with them instead of carrying a copy of the Bible, of course. So that kind of detail is genuine. So are all the stats about wool production and fleece and so forth. And so it's historically accurate, but it also is meant to make people understand the era better. I think it's very important people know that so much of the wealth in this country came from the sheep's back. It's important to know that 1 pound in weight of greasy fleece paid a white man's wages for a month. And each sheep carries pounds and pounds of wool, and the flocks of sheep are counted in thousands. It's just staggering, the value of the wool clip.
And that's basically every journal entry is either talking about having to repair things or head of sheep. And through that, you kind of get little tidbits here and there. I mean, his first journal entry is, well, not his very first, but one of the first journal entries is, got married by their father. That's it. That's all you get out of him. Yeah. And, no answer from his father. And then later, we're almost halfway through the book and I come across this line and I went, I was not expecting that. No answer from father ever regarding how come it is acceptable for two women to live together and just be called old maids, but it is not acceptable for two men to share their lives together. And I actually put a flag there with a big question mark because am I missing something here?
I think you found something.
And it's never mentioned again. It's never brought up again. It's not just nothing. And then wow, okay.
It's for the reader to fathom out.
Right.
He's trying to do what his father wants. His father wants grandsons to carry on the family name. His brother has lost his life in the war. But if you read on and come to the end and return back to the beginning.
Yes.
It begins to tie itself all together, except, of course, did you identify the missing clue in the police report, the original police report about the deceased male that's been found?
Yes, and I had some questions about that, but I don't want to give away too much. But my first question was about the initials, or am I off?
No, you're exactly right, but you're giving away an awful lot.
I'm sorry, I'm giving away too much now. But yeah, I got to the very end and it was like one of those M. Night Shyamalan movies where you're like, hold on, wait, okay, hold on. And then you have to go all the way back to the beginning and say, okay, yeah. And I do encourage our listeners, our followers to give it a read. And then all those questions you had along the way, go back and read it again and things will start to click into place. You'll be like, oh, yeah. So, I'm not going to say much more other than it's not a happy ending. There's no happiness to be found in this book. It's a very, like I said, very well written, beautiful book, yet very difficult because all your emotions get tangled up and you don't get, the Disney princess ending. You get a very realistic ending.
Exactly.
And it's tough. It's tough. And then you finish it, you close the last page and you do this for a minute. And then you go back and you read it again. So I recommend to folks to do that.
It's a very good book for book clubs.
Yes.
Because it's short and intense and full of curiosities. And it's not just a straightforward lived happily ever after fairy tale. It's far closer to the realities of the time. Sickness must have been a huge part of life in those days. And it's too easy to forget all that and exclude
and that we would succumb to things like measles or flu, or I mean, those were deadly things back then. We don't even think about that now.
Right.
Measles, mumps, chicken pox, whooping cough. I remember asking my mother, what happened in your day if a child was born with a recognizable handicap, such as Down syndrome or something? And without hesitation, she just said, oh, they were mercifully carried away by God, dear. And I said, well, what on earth do you mean by that? And she said, there were no immunizations in those days when a child that was obviously not going to have a very rewarding kind of a life, when that child became inevitably sick with measles, mumps, chickenpox, whooping cough, diphtheria, scarlet fever, any of those terrible sicknesses, no one actually nursed that infant back to health. They just put them aside to be mercifully carried away by God.
Oh.
It's a very different lifestyle.
Very different mindset, yeah. So wow.
But, yeah, that was the 1920s.
Yeah. That is a harsh reality. Very harsh reality. Now, besides the historical element, and I'm just going to be honest, you let us know you're an octogenarian. You are not a spring chicken. You are not a young, college student who's getting modern ideas in your head. Where did these, what we would consider to be modern ideas of gender equality or orientation or some of these other ideas, where did those come from with you? I mean, you've traveled the world. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but where did that come from a woman who isn't from these times and isn't, where did you even get these ideas?
Life experience teaches you a lot, and I have children of my own and grandchildren, and now I have great-grandchildren, and the gender diversity has always been there. It's just not been accepted until now. It's not been properly identified or accepted, although some of it now might be described as being taken over the top. I don't know, but I think gender diversity has always been there. It just wasn't accepted. It was swept under the carpet or denied. And I think that must have made life very hard for people like Tom, my character, Tom. And so once again, I'm trying to make the reader be imaginative about what's in the book. Use your imagination. What would it have been like? How hard would it have been to be socially unaccepted because of who you are?
Yeah, and the only insight you get into that is that one passage. You don't hammer it like so many modern writers do. You didn't make it the entire book about that. We were talking about gender equality, and I had mentioned briefly that I actually found the line, wife safely delivered a baby, don't think I'll bother notifying father as it's only a girl. No guarantee it's even mine.
Exactly.
That poor woman is out in the middle of nowhere. Whose does he think it is?
His good friend who brokered the marriage.
All right. I'm not going to say any more because I want people to come to their own conclusions. I just love that I got to pick your brain offline. I feel like I want to read the book again with the knowledge that I got from you. So nanny, nanny, boo boo to everybody who reads this book and doesn't get to talk to the author firsthand because there's a lot going on in this book. I want to talk about you though, while we have you, and we'll come back to the book. The book is, like I said, I've been gushing about it, but you, oh my goodness, what a life you've had. Mm-hmm. So you do have previous books. The one I was looking at is out of print. So I do want to ask about that for a couple of reasons. The title of it is Barefoot Roving the Traveling Kitchen. My first question, I'm a barefooter. I don't even own shoes. I go barefoot everywhere I go. we live in Texas, which is the Australia of the United States, meaning everything's out to kill you. We have fire ants and rattlesnakes and black widows and
we live out in the country where these things,
all of those things are in our yard right now. So we're like way out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Do people, I mean, I've heard that in town that being barefoot is like an Aussie thing, that nobody bats an eye, where here in the States, everybody's like freaked out about it all the time.
They bat an eye here.
We call them the shoe police. So tell me about this barefoot roving traveling kitchen. Is it a novel or a cookbook? What is it? Because I wasn't even able to, I found it, but it was out of print, so it didn't give me any information about it.
It's a lifestyle sort of a book. I spent some time living on a sailing boat, a Warren catamaran, which is to say the most basic catamaran you could ever go aboard. And because we were on the Cat, we have the most deck space. So when you stop and anchor somewhere every afternoon, people in other cruising yachts, they all congregate together for an evening tipple at sunset, but everyone used to come to our boat because we had the most deck space. This is not talking marinas and so forth. I'm talking open waters.
Right.
Australia has a vast coastline. If you're a mariner, you'd be very welcome here. You'd feel at home here because it's an island. It's got lots of coastline. And so it's a wonderful place to be on a cruising yacht. And so people would come aboard, and of course they bring their own grog, but then time goes on and people are hungry, so I would cook something and feed everybody, maybe a dozen people, and people would look down below on our Cat and say, "How did you do that? You haven't even got a fridge down there."
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you don't have electricity, so what are you cooking? Are you building fires on the deck of your boat?
Some of them do on Warrens, but we didn't. I had a pressure Kero stove and a pressure cooker. That's the key. So then people started asking me, how did you do that? Well, give me the recipe kind of thing. So I started writing down recipes and information about what to stow on a sailing boat, to go to remote places. I mean, you're in Texas, so you understand. There are vast tracts of coastline here where there is nobody. There's no internet connection. There's no phone coverage. There's no even radio except HF radio. You can't dial up some takeaway food or
that's where we're at. We don't have phone. We don't have internet. If it weren't for Elon Musk, we wouldn't have even the capability to reach the outside world. Can't get garbage service. You know, a lot of our electricity is on a co-op. So it's like we're not quite as pioneer woman as you were, but it is a different world. It's a very different world. People take so many things for granted. Yes.
And I do have some copies of the book left. I would love to send you one.
I would love one. I would love one. That would be awesome. Please.
It's if you give me your mailing address, I'll mail you a copy.
I absolutely will.
We'll definitely do that.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I'll pay shipping, whatever. I know how hard it is to ship things to Australia because my brother lives there. So it's. But yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I do. Yeah, I was pretty. I'm so selfish. Whenever we have an author on, I always ask for a hard copy of the book, because I have this fantasy of having a library that's nothing but original titles with author signatures in them. So I know you sent this directly because it would have been, pretty difficult to get a copy and then mail it and all that, because it is hard shipping things from Australia to this day. So please autograph it for me. It would make it a treasure. Like I said, I'm really selfish.
Some people stalk celebrities for autographs. She stalks authors.
Well, and it's funny because
she autographs her own books.
Yeah, so. I have 5 books as well, and people, it's just, there's something special about owning a book of a person you've actually met. You know, everybody can buy a Stephen King or whatever, but when you've actually met the person and you know the human being and the insights that you've given me offline, it just makes the book so much better. So I highly encourage people to, whenever you get a chance, if there's a signing or anything like that, meet the author if you can, because it does really change your experience with the book.
Yes.
All right. So you even living out in the middle of nowhere, growing up on, I love how you called it a yacht, but I mean, we think of yachts and we're thinking of these, you know, giant, beautiful ships with all the luxuries and not so much in your case. You have a pilot's license.
Yes.
You do everything. So tell us about that. Why, especially probably at a time that women weren't expected or possibly even allowed? What brought you to get a pilot's license?
Well, it's a long story and I won't take up too much of the time, but I will say that I learned to fly before GPS was invented. So we had to navigate. So we had a paper chart folded on our lap, and we had a compass with a hole in the middle and a piece of string. You put the compass on the paper chart and you laid off your course, and that was your true course, but you needed your magnetic course, and so you had to bank in the number of degrees of variation and so forth to get the course you need to steer to get to where you want to. All these things. Much harder today, but I loved it all. The navigation was hard, but I enjoyed it, and the meteorology I loved. All these different components of obtaining this license. And I still have the license, but if I wanted to fly now, I don't think I'd pass the medical test to allow me to pilot an aircraft. They don't allow octogenarians to do that. But I'm very happy I did the training, and it's a wonderful way to get around, to just cover the distances. It's wonderful. I loved it. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm thinking of all the knowledge you would have to have besides the, you know, we're talking about your main character in Grasp the Nettle, you know, well-read, educated, and yet there, you know, she's just thrown out in the middle of nowhere where none of that comes in handy. But you, not only do you have the writing and the reading and all that, but the math, the I have no directional sense. I have to GPS my way to the bathroom. So I can't even imagine knowing which way. Every time we get in the car and we're going somewhere and the GPS starts out with head north, I'm like, lady, if I knew which way north was, you'd be out of a job. So I can't even imagine being up in the air with a piece of paper and a pen and, you know, all the thing, and you're doing the math in your head. I mean, you must have just the most amazing brain to be able to have all those things in there at once. And I bet you can still do it to this day.
I think the book is proof that she has a great mind.
How long did this book take you to write, Sylvia?
It was sort of in my head for a long time, because the interpretations of the religious text are something I've been thinking about for a long time, especially the bit about who moved the stone to open the tomb.
That's a little edgy. Yeah, I'll let readers come to their own conclusion on that one.
Yeah, well, those kind of things have been in my head for a long time. And I don't know, it was COVID or something, time on your hands, and you start putting things down on paper. And I can't do a lot of the things I used to do because of my health problems and whatnot. So why not write? English is such a rich and beautiful language.
It is. We are blessed to have that as our primary language.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we borrow from everybody, so we get all the extra words that other languages don't.
Yes, that we get the shades of meaning that other languages don't have because it's diverse and so forth. It's absolutely wonderful. We lived in the Central Pacific region in the 60s, and I learnt to speak, read and write Kiribati, which is the language of the Kiribati people, Gilbert and Ellice Islands they used to be called, and that is an astonishingly interesting language because they have only 9 letters in their alphabet.
Huh.
Oh, wow.
Really only 1/10. So it's essentially a spoken language. To understand the meaning of what someone is saying, you have to hear the emotion in their voice. So it's definitely not a richly written language. It's beautiful, and they express what they want to say, but you really need to hear what someone is telling you to understand it. And that is the absolute other extreme of, I shouldn't say that because I've never studied Chinese, for instance. But English is such a rich language. It's just wonderful. And Shakespeare, of course, was the master of the English language. Absolutely. Yes, and Chaucer too. Wonderful. Yes, one of the pilgrims is the pardoner in the Canterbury Tales, and he describes him very aptly just in the words he uses. The pardoner, somebody handling small sums of money. He was a bit of a dodgy sort of a bloke, a bit like a naval purser, a bit questionable about what happens to these small sums of money. And Chaucer describes him as having red hair, red as the bristles of a sow's ear. And straight away you bring to mind the old saying, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's
ear. Right.
There's always both Chaucer and Shakespeare and you've got that same gleam in your eye where you have this poetic language, but there's always just a little kind of in the background. You have that same gleam in your eye.
I enjoy the language. I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
There are wonderful words that I wish people used more often, like apricity. What a wonderful word. And uxorious, that wonderful word, and the history of that word is so interesting to me. When the men were putting together the Oxford English Dictionary, they asked all sorts of people, women in particular, these educated women who were twiddling their thumbs waiting to be married off. They would send in examples of text that proved what a word actually meant. And they sent in examples, quotes from text that proved what the word uxorious means. But the men putting the dictionary together couldn't bring themselves to write it accurately. So if you look up the word uxorious, the dictionary says, inordinately fond of his wife. How can any man be described as inordinately fond of his wife?
Inordinately,
Inordinately, I love you.
It doesn't make sense. But if you go back and read the quotations from text that proves what the word really means, you find that it means a marriage where the husband allows the wife to wear the pants, to be the boss, and he's a man. But it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Yeah.
That is often how our marriage is. A little window into our life here.
Yeah. Not by choice.
Yeah.
That is something that we run across often because we're both voracious readers, and there are so many words that only really come to life in context. And then there are times where I'll say something and it's a word that I understand and I've embraced, but I've never actually heard. I've only read it. And my pronunciation of it is so abysmal that he's just like, what are you trying to say? And then we'll laugh. And sometimes you feel like you're a dum-dum, but then you realize, well, hold on a second. A lot of people that are much smarter than I am have probably never even come across this word. And even if they know how to pronounce it, they might not know what it means. And there's just a certain, you can tell who is a reader, because every now and then they'll come out with a word that not very many people use, but they just pronounce it totally wrong. You're like, you're a reader. You're a reader.
We had a famous prime minister here once who did exactly that. And she said, oh, that press report is just hyperbole. It's hyperbole.
And the thing with the word hyperbole is it ain't spelled the way it's said, and it ain't said the way it's spelled.
Yes, because it's great.
Yeah. I think one of those.
Just pronounce it hyperbole.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
That's how it's spelled.
But,
yeah.
Whatever.
People are so much fun, and I miss being able to celebrate each other's differences and have fun with that and poke fun at each other. And we become so uptight. Do you experience that at all? And in your book, as you were writing that, did you get a little bit of joy from her just being so free and able to talk about things like race and, the natives that she mentions and, Islam. And I mean, all these like really big things that we're not allowed to talk about. And she just, talks about it. And did you find that freeing?
Oh, absolutely. It's her personal diary. It's not, she's not writing it for public consumption. It's her personal record. And she says in the beginning that she's not going to ever put down an untruth on the pages.
Mm-hmm.
The diary should be like a best friend, someone in whom you confide. And she's able to say anything because diaries were very personal things. They were not shared. And it's interesting too that she believes that when she finally gets the chance to read Tom's diary, she's going, yes, she thinks that it might contain lots of poetry and so forth because he's out there under the stars. The skies here are just fabulous. So many stars and so forth. And she's expecting some romantic kind of display of his true character. But we, the reader, know she's not going to read that. It's not going to be at all.
No, nothing like it.
Why is it that Tom doesn't engage at all? I mean, even in his own diary that he knows nobody's going to read, why is that like the male role that his father expected of him?
I think he's trying to do what his father wants. He's trying to be the obedient son, even though it's against his instincts, if you like. And I'm sure he must have felt very sorry that his brother had lost his life defending the empire in a foreign country, not even defending Australian soil, really. So many men left this country to go to the First World War. They enlisted voluntarily, and so many of them didn't come back. And I'm sure any brother of any soldier who'd lost their life like that would have felt an obligation to replace them, if you like, or do their best to do what the father wanted. And so he's not likely to engage with her romantically and yet he is worried about her. He brings home the goat in Kid in case she doesn't survive childbirth, you see. And that information came to me from my father's great-grandfather's journal that he wrote in 1820, travelling from Scotland to Cape Town and then to Australia. That journal says 2 or 3 days out of Leith Roads in Scotland, Major McLeod's goat dropped a kid last night. And you ask yourself, why on earth would anybody have a heavily pregnant goat in their goods and chattels travelling from Scotland?
For the milk, yeah.
And then a few days later, they're in very rough seas in the Bay of Biscay. And he says, Major McLeod's wife gave birth to a son last night. So they would have had the goat in case she didn't survive and to provide milk. And that's primary historical documentation. And to me, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And there were a lot of little historical tidbits that you have to stop and think about. And then it just, that makes complete sense. The minute I thought about it, goat's milk, that would be the next best thing. Yeah. And then you start going off into this other, well, what happens if she doesn't make it? I mean, would he have to stay home and take care of the baby? And then if it's a girl, would he bother? And so you have all these questions that of course aren't addressed in the book because the story moves in a different direction. But I really appreciate how it makes you think.
That's
and
exactly.
Almost write your own narrative. And I think that was very, I don't want to say calculated, but the way you wrote it, it's like you specifically wanted people to do that and that's why it's so short. I don't want to say short, but that's why it's so, well, it is short. It's a small book. It's a little book, but there's so much in here. And so you literally put it down and go, okay, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And then you try to guess what's going on. I thought when based on the information I got before I got the book, I thought it was a whodunit. I thought it was a murder mystery. It's really, really not. It is not a murder mystery. It's something completely different altogether. And there's some tough things in here, and then there's some fascinating things in here. And then there's some things that you could get in big trouble for saying today. And I have a flag here where you talk about, talking about Hakim, one of the Muslim traders. I'm not going to read it because we'd probably get blasted right off the internet for doing it. It's very, very true, very, very honest, and something that we were able to talk about. Now we're not. And she just puts it right there in her diary, not on the internet. Tell us a little bit about that, because that is today, and you have children, and I'm assuming grandchildren. So the choice to not be on Facebook and all the other places, that is a conscious choice nowadays.
Yes, it is. I'm not tech savvy at all. I have to rely on my daughter for this connection today, for instance. I'm very happy to live my own little tiny life the way I do. And I live in the tropics, but I don't have air conditioning in the house and that kind of thing.
Oh, my.
So I changed the house to suit the climate instead of trying to change the climate to suit the house. And I just don't have the energy to be on Facebook and all these things, and I really don't enjoy the way the language is being reduced to the sort of lowest common denominator.
You've got a definite point there.
I definitely agree there.
And all the scamming that goes on, I don't want to be part of that or a victim of that. It must be very easy to be a victim of that. Harder and harder. People don't accept personal checks anymore. And so I'm stubbornly staying away from a lot of the modern tech stuff. But
your bio said you don't even have an ATM card.
No.
Yeah, you are fighting tooth and nail, and keep it up. Keep it up, Sylvia. Don't let them get you.
Thank you. I've never used an ATM. I've never swiped a card. I don't have a credit card. Yeah. Anyway.
They are trying to get us away from cash. I think that would be a big mistake, especially all of this could go away. You get one EMP, one magnetic pulse, or the sun decides to throw a flare or something. It could just all go away in the blink of an eye. And then what?
Yes. That's the same with GPS. They can turn that off at any it was developed as a weapon of war, they can cancel that. And then how are people going to navigate and so forth? They've never learned.
Right.
Yeah.
Way. I treasure that knowledge of navigation and stuff, but I'm just a grumpy granny.
I guess all that is to say, Sylvia, that when the zombie apocalypse hits and all the lights go out, you're going to be the only survivor. You're going to be the one who knows what you're doing.
Well, oh, goodness me. But I'll happily send you a copy of Barefoot Roving because it has instructions on how to preserve fish, for instance.
Oh, definitely.
Lovely.
And how to start a bread sour starter for sourdough bread.
That is the one bread I have yet to try making.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
She's an excellent baker.
Yeah.
She hasn't tried this.
I've mastered whole wheat pretzels of all things, that I've tried a lot of different things. And as I was learning how to bake, I've become quite the frontier wife out here.
Very good. Yes. Well, most people make sourdough bread by feeding a bread sour starter, but my book tells you how to start a starter, not just feed a starter that somebody else started.
Lovely.
So it's treasured information, I think, because that kind of information falls into the grave with old people, doesn't it? Anyway, I'll send you a copy.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to that. I will definitely give the sourdough start a start, and hopefully we become pen pals. I'll let you know how it goes.
It would be wonderful. Yes.
Sylvia, you have been such a joy.
Absolutely.
And if you ever write another book, let me know. We'll have you right back on. Is there anything you would like folks to know that we haven't gone over? It's your chance to blast out to the world. Anything that you'd like us to know, or anything that's coming on the horizon for you?
Well, I think the information in the book is very intense and very varied. It would make a good Netflix series.
Yes, it would.
Is interested in that. The historical stuff is accurate and the storyline is interesting enough. That's the comment I'd like to make, that I think it could receive a far wider audience. It is available as an audio book.
Oh, it is?
Yes, an e-book and a hard copy. But I think it would be a success as a series, whatever you call it, Netflix series. Yeah.
Netflix, Amazon, one of those. Yeah. So the book is Grasp the Nettle by Sylvia Lerch, and do go on Amazon. We'll have the link on our website, counterculturewise.com, also in the comments if you're watching this, or if you're listening to this, because we have both audio and video versions of our podcast. So if you're listening to this, head on over to our website so you can see the lovely woman's face. She's got, like I said, that gleam in her eye that I think you'll enjoy. And go get the book. It's quite a read, and do sit down with a nice hot cup of tea or coffee and snuggle in and take the time to absorb it. And then when you're done reading it, go back and read it again, because you're going to find more than you bargained for in the book. Sylvia, you've been such a joy. I will let you, I know it's very late there. It's relatively early here. So we will let you get on with your evening. Thank you again so much. And I hope that you do continue to write. You are gifted. And I look forward to reading what you write next.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you and reach all your followers. It's worth a lot to me.
Us as well. Thank you so much. You have a lovely evening. It was very nice meeting you.
Thank you. And you.